Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 90, and we are going to take a look at a brand new labor union in the United States. This is wonderful news. It is the Amazon Labor Union. I never thought a labor union would organize within Amazon or about Amazon. But we will go ahead and take a look at that. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners. So let me go to my list here. So a big shout out to, Alabama, Pennsylvania, Oregon, Florida, New York, Texas, my lovely neighbor, Oklahoma and Virginia. Good to see you there. In terms of countries, South Africa, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. I love you, Canada. You guys are amazing. I love your country. I just wish it wasn't socialist. I just wish it was more free. Because I do know that there are some people from your country that they are having to come to the United States for healthcare treatment because they have socialized medicine in Canada, and unfortunately they're put on waiting lists, and there are a great many things, medically speaking and health-wise, that you cannot wait. You cannot be put on a waiting list. So, God bless you guys. I think it's wonderful that I don't like your situation in regards to your health care, but I do think it's wonderful that you get to seek health care in the United States, because we have really good health care here, and I wish that you guys had it there. I wish you had more access, but just so you know, you guys, even though you're a socialist in Canada, you have way more access to health care than in the UK, much less Australia. So, it's kind of one of those things, count your blessings, count them twice. But the good thing about you, Canada, is that you are our neighbor to the north. And I know that we do try and help you guys whenever we can, especially with medical issues and things like that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this wonderful piece about the Amazon Labor Union. And it says here, the Amazon Labor Union, also known as ALU, is a grassroots movement and an independent labor union specifically for Amazon workers. It was created on April 20th, 2021. And it says on April 1st, 2022, the Amazon workers at a warehouse in Staten Island, JFK8, backed by the ALU, became the first unionized Amazon workers recognized by the National Labor Relations Board. And it says here that they were formed April 20th, 2021. Their type is a labor union. Let's see here. Their location is in New York City, New York. Their president is Chris Smalls. And let's see here. Just a little bit of brief history. It says that Chris Smalls and some others went on strike at their facility because they were not happy about how Amazon responded to COVID-19. And I guess he was quickly terminated, unfortunately, even though he was trying to help address the situation within Amazon. And so a couple things going on there with that. Here's the thing: when you are working in mail delivery, or you're working in an industry where you're shipping goods, things like that, protocols are a little bit different than in like a doctor's office and things like that. But I don't know what all Amazon did to cause a problem. I don't know what they did to not address the problems. But it just simply says here, Smalls, along with Derek Palmer, had organized a walkout at the JFK8 facility to protest Amazon's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had led to the firing of Smalls. Smalls' termination was widely criticized by government officials and prompted Smalls to form TCOEW and lead a number of strike actions. So it says here, there was something else I was going to say. I'm not interested in that other part. I just want to get to the meat and potatoes of this. So it says, over 50 Amazon warehouses contacted the ALU in attempts to organize their own workplaces, with some facilities from Canada, India, South Africa, and the United Kingdom asking the ALU for assistance. So in terms of leadership, it says, again, the president is Chris Smalls, vice president of organizing is Derek Palmer, Vice President of Membership is Connor Spence. The Treasurer is Madeline Wesley. And the Secretary is Karen Ponce. So, in terms of the membership, it says over a 5-day period between March 25th and March 30th, 2022, workers voted for unionizing the JFK 8 warehouse in Staten Island. On April 1st, 2022, the ballot count concluded with 2,654 in favor of unionizing and 2,131 voting against. So here's the thing, that's not a landslide. So there were actually quite a few people that did not want to form a union. So that tells you that not everybody is on the same boat. They're not all on the same page. I do think that working conditions can be improved at Amazon, but I also think that it also depends on your, how do I describe this? It depends on your work environment. Like there's some jobs that are just naturally more dangerous than others. I'll give an example. Firefighters. You know, their working conditions are hardly ever safe just because of the nature of the job. You know, there are some people that they're just not made or built to do certain jobs, or maybe they don't have the mentality or they don't have the passion for that work. So I know that from meeting with people that work in the shipping industry, which is technically what Amazon is. I mean, it's technically a big retail store that's online, but in terms of these workers that we're talking about, they're basically in the business of shipping, you know, kind of like USPS or UPS or FedEx. So those types of jobs are very strenuous. They are very difficult. They are not easy. And I know from personal experience from interviewing for a UPS job years ago, this was back when I was in college, I was interviewing for a summer job. And I thought, well, I'll just be a driver, you know. No, UPS doesn't work that way. They put you through the ringer, at least they did back then. And so what they would have you do is they would have you work in a hot warehouse, no AC during the summertime in Oklahoma. It was brutal. And it looked like there was, I don't know if it's called asbestos, but it's that foamy stuff that was poking out of the ceiling and poking out of the walls everywhere in this warehouse in Oklahoma City. And they had these large fans, but everybody was just, it was a sweat box. I mean, everybody was sweating. And I just thought, this is not safe. It's not right to do this to people. And I spoke to the woman that I had interviewed with, and I said, hey, you know, I think there's been a mistake. I signed up or applied to be a driver. You know, I'm not interested in working in a warehouse. Like, there's a lot of this stuff I can't do, but, you know, I can lift and load stuff on a truck and I can deliver it like I love to drive. And she got angry at me. And she said, in order to be a driver and to work in this company, you have to serve your time. Basically, you have to start at the bottom and suffer like everybody else. And I said, you know, I don't think this is the job for me because this is not how it was explained to me. And she said, look, I went through the same thing. We all have to serve our time. I'm like, this is not a prison. Okay? So let me put it this way. I did not agree with the work environment of UPS way back in the day. I don't know if they have changed it since then. But I just felt like, okay, even Walmart and other places have air conditioning. Like, it doesn't cost millions of dollars to have air conditioning. They didn't have any air conditioning in this building. It was horrible. And, you know, people were dropping like flies. And we got to take a tour of it. And we went through the break room and people were just sitting there. And I felt like we needed to call 911. I mean, we didn't. But I was just like, I think these people are having a heat stroke. I was very concerned for the health and safety of those employees. So here's the thing. That work is hard and laborious anyway, right? But where the employer failed was they did not provide a safe working condition. So, like, especially in regards to temperature, because here's, you know, one thing that sometimes people forget about is that you can only raise the human body temperature so much before you start to nuke your organs and before you start having organ failure. That's why it's very dangerous when you have a fever and you have it for a long period of time. So, you know, you can lose consciousness, you can go into a coma, and sometimes there's permanent brain damage, sometimes there's permanent damage to the heart, the lungs, things of that nature. So, in regards to Amazon, I don't know what was going on in terms of COVID-19 or the other things that I've heard about Amazon and their warehouses, but here's the thing. Is the job somewhat dangerous? Yes. Whenever you are working in a warehouse, there is more danger at that job than working in an office like being a staff accountant. Like it's two totally different work environments. So they're not comparable. However, both work environments, they are guaranteed safe working conditions for that particular job. So for example, like at Amazon, if you are working a forklift, well, guess what? You have to be licensed and you have to have a permit in order to work a forklift. But if the employer, and I'm not saying Amazon did this, but the way that Amazon would be negligible and responsible and in violation of labor laws is if they were forcing people or encouraging people to operate equipment that they're not properly trained on, they're not licensed, and that they're not comfortable working on it. The main thing is not having training and not being licensed. Because I know that in order to operate a forklift, you're supposed to have a permit, like the individual, like you're supposed to go to a class, you're supposed to pass a test. It's almost like driver's ed. You're supposed to be licensed and you're supposed to know what you're doing. Also, I know from watching a documentary about warehouses or something, this was several years ago, I can't remember which warehouse this documentary was taking place at. It was not at Amazon, I know that. But there are different types of warehouses, and depending on what you have going on at your warehouse will determine what kind of shoes you wear, what kind of clothes you wear, what kind of shift you have, what kind of machinery you operate, and whether or not you wear a hard hat. So there was this one scene I remember, there was this really big guy, and I don't mean big as in fat, I just mean like he was really built like with muscle. And he was operating a forklift, but he had on one of those hard hat things, like that you see at construction sites. Well, the reason for that is to protect his head just in case anything should fall on him. And not even just heavy stuff, but it's just safety measures. So he knew with that job, there's always associated risk with the natural risk of the job. Now, in regards to Amazon, I don't know exactly what they did or did not do to protect their employees, but I do know that if you are working in a job where you are around a lot of people, it's very difficult to control infectious disease. It just is. Oklahoma has big problems with this because, before COVID-19 hit, the number one reason why Oklahoma was in the news was because we had one of the highest death rates due to the flu every single year. And one thing that I could not stand about Oklahoma prior to COVID-19 was that employers were just horrible to workers and they would force them to go to work even if they were sick because they valued the work more than they did the safety of the worker. And I experienced that. Like there was one time I was working in retail years ago. I may have already told this story in a previous podcast, but I was working in retail and my boss threatened me and said, if you don't show up to work, you will lose your job. And I was like, I am really sick, like I'm contagious. Like I had some kind of upper respiratory infection, I had a cold, and I also had a fever. So because I was way younger and I feared losing my job and I didn't know I could sue them or go to court or whatever or report them as like a whistleblower situation to the federal government or to the Department of Labor, I showed up to work sick and I almost collapsed. And this other boss that I had in another department, she saw me and she said, you need to go home. And I said, I know, but they're threatening me, to lose my job. And she said, don't worry about it, I'll cover you. She goes, I'll let them know that you have a fever. She goes, it is obvious that you're sick. You need to go home and get well. I said, thank you. So I was out from work for almost a week. It was either like 4 to 7 days. I can't remember exactly how many days because I had a fever. I was kind of in and out of consciousness at home with that fever. But see, here's the thing. That was back during the days when your employer, it's like they acted like they owned you. And I hated that. I have always hated that. And it's like, really, like, how would you like it if somebody treated you like that? But it's like, if you're not in management, you're just a piece of meat. You're just a piece of bait. And I never really liked being treated that way. Nobody does. But needless to say, there are people that have lost their jobs because of medical reasons, and that's one of the reasons why we have the Federal Medical Leave Act, is to protect the worker. And that's at a federal level. Now, we have stuff that takes place in terms of protecting the worker at the federal level and the state level. So what I do like about labor unions is they really do try and protect people's jobs. What I do get concerned with in regards to this labor union and any labor union, but especially in regards to Amazon, is will this affect the prices of the products, and will it affect when and if they deliver your packages? Because, one of the things that people may not realize is that when you unionize something as important as shipping goods, you're taking a huge risk of causing inflation within the private sector on goods that are delivered, and you're also taking the risk of increasing the cost of shipping itself, so much so that it's ridiculous. And an example of this is USPS. Now, we've discussed USPS and all the different unions that are associated with the post office, because there's several of them. It depends on whether it depends what kind of job you have within the United States Postal Service. And if you're a letter carrier or a postmaster general or whatever the case may be, there's different unions for different reasons. But, the post office is notorious for overspending its money, having really cushy benefits that it cannot afford for its workers. It's not realistic. They overpay their workers. They have way too good of benefits that the average person does not have access to. And yet they throw some of the biggest hissy fits about pay. And it's like, wow, you're making double, almost triple what the average person makes, and these people don't even have to have graduated from high school. That's the problem. So I do get concerned with Amazon, with it having a labor union, in that, if they start raising prices on stuff, less people are going to do business online. And people will go back to doing business at brick and mortar stores, which brick and mortar stores would greatly appreciate. Because one of the reasons why a bunch of brick and mortar stores have closed is because of Amazon and other internet retailers. So I think we're going to see a lot going on with this labor union in the years to come, especially the first 5 to 10 years. I think it will be really telling of what the true intention of this labor union is. Now, I completely understand why the labor union was created. Because if someone is very upset about something at their work and they feel like they're not being listened to and their safety is not valued, which I don't know if that is exactly what happened. I haven't found anything yet to prove that. But here's the thing. Workers' rights, first of all, start with equality and safety. And those are just basic. That's just basic. We're not even talking about getting paid way more money or talking about cushy healthcare benefits or whatever the case may be. There are just basic rights that workers have, regardless of who they work for in the private sector in the United States. The only thing I don't like about labor unions is when they affect the cost of goods, because it leads to inflation. We are already having a tremendous problem with inflation in the United States right now. And so I really get cautious with labor unions like this, because people are already suffering financially, and they don't need it to be made worse with behavior like this. So hopefully this labor union is on the up and up, and they want things to be better. The other thing I get concerned with is it says here, again, over 50 Amazon warehouses contacted the Amazon labor union in attempts to organize their own workplaces with some facilities from Canada, India, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. Here's the thing. Canada, socialized country, their labor unions, we haven't even started to cover those. That will be very interesting, but they look at labor very differently than the United States, because they're socialist. So I think we need to be careful about aligning ourselves with any kind of labor union outside of the United States. Number 2, India. India is not a safe place to work. They still have slave labor. They don't admit that they do, but they do. They do have slave labor, and it's always women and children that suffer the worst. They also still have the caste system. And the caste system, it's still there, it's still horrible, and it's degrading to human life. Number 3, in India, It's not sanitary over there. They have tremendous amounts of starvation. They have tremendous amounts of disease. And the reason is that because, it's one thing if you're rich and live in the city. Most people are not rich in India. They're not even middle class. India doesn't even really have a middle class. But here's the thing. If you're not super wealthy and you don't live in the city, then guess what? You either live in the country or you live in the village. So those things greatly impact the safety of the work environment. And so one thing I talked about in a previous podcast in regards to India is that there are different generic drug manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies that are located in India that we are purchasing those drugs to be sold here in the United States. I wish they would stop doing that because we need to make our own generics. Because we have way better rules, laws, and regulations, and we have way better quality standards. And we have way better ethics than India and the companies over there. And so this is just kind of a refresher, but, Senator Elizabeth Warren, she is on a Senate hearing committee or something, and they were investigating these different drug manufacturers, especially in India, where their generic drugs were contaminated with glass, bloodborne pathogens, urine, feces, and who knows what else. And then these drugs were bought and shipped over to the United States. So here's the thing. I don't think it's smart for us to get involved in India's labor when they don't operate the same way as we do. They are not capitalist. They are not a democracy. I think in terms of their government, it's a parliament, but it's kind of a joke. Because it's like, if you live in the city, then, we have a parliament and we believe in democracy. But the moment you step foot outside that city, they still have the caste system. They still are horrible to women over there. I mean, it's bad. I mean, it's just really bizarre. And, their life expectancy is not close to ours. And so, they have a lot of problems with disease over there. So needless to say, when COVID-19 hit India, it was really bad. But here's the thing. They have a type of socialized medicine over there. They have a very centralized healthcare system. It's not privatized, so it sucks. It's not very good at all. It's very dangerous for one's health. And it's not where it needs to be. Like, their healthcare system is a nightmare, especially compared to ours. Like, we are considered like a 5-star hotel in terms of our healthcare system in the United States compared to India. India is like a 1 or a 0 in terms of its healthcare system. Just because, you can look up beautiful pictures of the fancy cities over there, that does not represent what India really is and how they function, how they operate. And how things work or function. You can always find a rich person in any country, but just because you can find these rich, beautiful buildings, these rich people and these industries that make millions or billions of dollars, that doesn't mean that, first of all, their country is stable. That doesn't mean it's sanitary. That doesn't mean that they operate the same way as the Food Drug Administration, the FDA. That doesn't mean that they have the same labor laws, because they don't. They very much discriminate against women over there. Because women are not considered equal to men in India. So we really need to be careful about aligning ourselves with other countries that do not have the same standards, rules, laws, or regulations, and also if they violate human rights. That is a big issue there. Because I'm not interested in helping them, form any labor unions over there. Like, they don't even value human life the same way that we do. So why would we help protect them, with a labor union? They're so backwards in how they function, how they do things, and it's not right. So here's the thing. We need to be careful who we do business with, because whoever you do business with is who you are making it seem like you agree with what they do. We need to do business with people that operate and function the same way that we do here in the United States. So the next country it listed in terms of warehouses that contacted the Amazon Labor Union is South Africa. Now, South Africa, parts of it can be very beautiful. I understand that, Elon, I think that's his name, Elon Musk is from there, and his mom is from there, and then, who else am I thinking of? That Trevor guy. I can see his face, but he's the comedian, has a really sexy accent. I think he's from South Africa. But what's interesting is that guy that has his own show, that's a comedian, he talks openly about the discrimination that took place against him and his mother in South Africa, because I think his mother was black, his mother was black, his father was a white German guy, which means he was probably pretty pale. He was probably very Anglo-Saxon Caucasian in terms of skin coloring. But there was a whole lot of discrimination against blacks where he grew up, and against mixed colored babies. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but a mixed race child, basically. So, I'm going to look up his name while I'm talking, but he experienced definitely some discrimination over there that Trevor Noah, I just looked it up. He is a South African comedian. I thought it was Noah, but I wasn't sure. Okay, so he talks openly very much about what he went through as a child and what he lived and went through over there. And what I love about one of his interviews that he discussed about the racism that he experienced was that his mother would always say something along the lines of, well, we need to give it to Jesus so Jesus can give it right back to them and just give them a whole lot of love. And it was just so beautiful and such a sweet thing to say. Like, I would love to meet Trevor Noah, and I would love to meet his mom. I just think that is such a sweet thing. And I just thought, what an interesting way to make a negative situation positive and to make it about Jesus Christ. I just think that is, that takes guts to do that for that woman. That is amazing. So Trevor Noah, God bless your mother. She sounds like a sweetheart. I'm just amazed at her patience, with humanity. Because I know that when I was in my 20s, I was quick to curse at people if ever they offended me or wronged me. And, I think we can take a leaf out of your mother's book and, take it on the chin, so to speak, and be patient with other people, especially in the face of adversity. So God bless you, Trevor Noah. Love you very much. Would love to meet you and your mother. Just sounds like a wonderful woman. And no wonder you are such a kind and funny soul. You just kind of remind me of someone that it's like you have an old soul, but you're in a young body. You know what I mean? I just think it's wonderful what you do. So keep up the good work of making people laugh. I think that's wonderful. You obviously were raised correctly. In regards to the labor union issue with South Africa, there are parts of South Africa that are safe and some that are not. Now, several years ago, I met a white guy who had a really neat accent. I was like, where are you from? Like, it's almost British, but not. He goes, oh, South Africa. I was like, oh, really? So he was from an area where there was like a 40% death rate, especially against white people, is what he told me. And he said that, especially for white males, there was a high murder death rate amongst white males and crimes committed against them. So he said, well, I had to leave South Africa because it wasn't safe for me, so he immigrated to the United States. So I don't know much about the labor laws in South Africa, but I do know that there are safe, beautiful places, but once you get outside those safe, beautiful places, it can be very dangerous. Another thing that we discussed in another podcast was I saw this documentary, and I cannot remember the lady's name, but she owns a farm in South Africa. She owns land, her and her family do, and they were having to deal with racism, but opposite. It was like, they are a white family, they own their land, and, they have their own business, but they were experiencing death threats from African Americans that lived in that area, and they didn't think that whites should live there, so they literally had to start arming themselves with guns because of the violence that was taking place on their property, and they were being threatened. So, that being said, we don't have stuff like that happening here in the United States. There are so many things that we do not have taking place here. So I think we need to be careful again about who we do business with and who are we aligning ourselves with, especially in regards to labor laws and labor unions, because just because we have a set way of doing things here, that doesn't mean that people do the exact same thing in other countries. Because if they don't have the same rules, laws, and regulations, it really doesn't make sense to align yourself with them in business or in a labor union because, number one, you're not going to be starting out at the same place. You don't have the same rules, laws, and regulations, and also you will be fighting different things. And another problem is that typically the United States is used as a slush fund for other people's pet projects, and I don't want the United States to be used for that because, first of all, we should never be used, but we can do better than that. The other country listed is the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is notorious for being socialist and not paying its bills. And so an example I gave of how this is nothing new, this has been going on for a long time. I don't know if you remember the show, Are You Being Served? It's a hilarious show. It was on OETA, PBS, Channel 13, which is the public broadcasting station here in Oklahoma. And there was a show that would come on, Are You Being Served, like every Sunday night. I forget what time. It was late. But my sister and I would stay up and watch it because it was so funny. But I'll never forget one of the episodes. I think it was in the 70s. And the staff of the store, they got stranded at their place of employment, which is a department store. And the reason why they got stranded was because the bus drivers and train drivers went on strike, like all across the United Kingdom. And what's interesting about this show, Are You Being Served, is it brought up a lot of good points about some of the stupid stuff that goes on in terms of labor unions and how, labor unions, they may be fussy and fight for certain things, but at the same time, they don't care if they leave people hanging. Like these bus drivers and train drivers, they didn't care that people couldn't get home. They didn't care that people would have to walk 20 miles one way to get home. Like they just didn't care. So what was funny was this show, which is a comedy show, totally called that labor union out on it, a couple of them, in a polite way. And they just kind of made it funny. And it's like, it just seemed like the way the show was done was that was common back then. That these labor unions would just close up shop and, get people to not go to work and say, hey, if you're in the union, you can't go to work, even if you wanted to. Otherwise, you could be kicked out of the union. So, needless to say, there are quite a few unions in the United Kingdom, which we haven't discussed just yet, but we will get to. But it's one of those things that, their labor unions operate in a very different way than ours here in the United States. It's kind of like, when my mom and I went to Italy several years ago, and it was like one of the few trips we ever took to Europe, and it was a kind of a once in a lifetime kind of trip. And so we went over there, and there were strikes everywhere. And one of the people we were traveling with said, "Oh, that's just the Italians. They strike over anything and everything. They just like to argue." And they were right. They were having a strike over the cost of fuel because, in Italy, it's the government that's in charge of the fuel and they set the prices. So the prices went up really high. It hiked, or it spiked, I should say. And so the citizens were upset about that. And I'm just like, well, you know what? How about instead of striking, you fire the people that are in charge and you start voting in a conservative, capitalist kind of way? Because if you say you really care about money and you don't like having to pay these high prices, why do you keep voting in socialist or fascist people? It's just stupid, because Italy has been fascist for a long time. It teeter-totters between fascism and socialism, even though they don't like to admit that. It actually is true. So they were striking over gas prices. And then there were these kids that they couldn't even legally vote or own a house or anything. They were striking, and they were refusing to go to school because they disagreed with the Minister of Education. And I'm like, okay, they're just brainwashed by their teachers who don't like this woman that's in charge of the Ministry of Education. So they were striking over that. And then there was a third strike. I can't remember what. But it was like there were just strikes everywhere while we were there in Italy. And I just thought, what is going on with this country? But here's the thing. Do we want America to become like that? Where it's like no one goes to work, but everybody wants money. Well, that's called greed. So we need to be careful about things like that, because is there a time and place to strike? Yes. But there's also a time and place to suck it up, get back to work, and do the job that you're paid to do. Because, it really shocked me, and this was several years ago when we went to Italy. it just shocked me how people behaved, but yet they expected to get paid. I'm like, you're not even showing up to work. Like, you're not doing the job. And, you're just destroying private property. Like, what's wrong with you? Do you really think an employer is going to want to work with you, going to work it out with you when you're behaving like that? Of course not. It makes it very difficult to get things done, right? So, but anyway, that is it for this podcast, because we discussed pretty much everything that was going on with this one. So I think more is to come in regards to the Amazon labor union, and I just pray that it doesn't get out of hand, because here's the thing, if it gets out of hand, it's going to affect pricing all across the board, and it's going to lead to job loss. See, because here's the thing, if Amazon doesn't, if they don't collect or claim a profit, then they can't employ people. So, or as many people. So typically what happens sometimes is whenever labor unions get involved and they start to greatly increase wages, whether, your actual hourly wages or your salary wages, or if they increase your benefits to the point that it's not feasible, just like USPS, it's completely unrealistic what they do. It means people will not want to do business with you. Like, they may support the fact that you may not like your job, but at the end of the day, you still have a job and you're supposed to do your job. And if you don't like your job, get a different job. Like, you don't have to stay in that occupation. And here's the thing, I've seen and met a lot of Amazon drivers. A lot of them are really young. And it's like, I don't expect them to stay in that job all of their life. Like, I would think that Amazon drivers and warehouse workers, I would think that would be temporary. You might work there a couple years, and, maybe you could apply for a position that's at corporate, and just work your way up. But here's the thing. There are some people that think that when they start a job, that they're going to keep that job and they're never going to go anywhere else. And it's like, that's not really realistic anymore. That may have been realistic, during our parents' times, with the baby boomers, where you worked at one job for 30, 40, 50 years, and then at the end of that time, you got the gold watch. Well, the average lifespan of your career with one particular employer is maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe less than that now. So we kind of need to be realistic about what is actually going on and what we can actually accomplish to make things better. So hopefully things will not be turbulent with the Amazon labor union, and I pray that we do not do labor unions in other countries, because I think that will greatly impact things in a negative way, because, we are not responsible for other countries. That's the other thing I wanted to mention before we close this podcast out for this episode. A lot of the labor unions that we have discussed, some of them are associated with like an international union, and it typically deals with Canada and with Europe. And see, here's the thing. It's one thing to know about other unions that are similar to yours, but it's completely different when you organize in a way where you're from other countries. It's like, but we're not responsible for other countries. See, I think they're just trying to make it like some stupid utopia. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, not by any means. Here's the thing, though. Utopias do not exist. They just do not. That's not how our planet works. And here's another thing. I don't want our labor unions to be doing business with other labor unions or be consolidating under one umbrella, because usually it comes down to monies and where these monies are being held and how they're being utilized. Like, I get very skeptical very quick about some of these things, because, we have seen where, it's like the bigger they get, the more they don't know, what the left hand is doing from the right hand. And plus, as I've said before, we are not responsible for any other countries. We are not responsible for them. Can we be concerned for, their safe work environment issues? Sure, we can be concerned, but, you need to be careful who you support, because then you're putting yourself on the hook for their problems. And I don't think it's right to do that to Amazon as a company. I don't think it's right to do that to the United States, because we can do better. And here's another thing. There is no other country on the face of this earth that is as successful as the United States. So why are we trying to hold those same standards to other countries? If anything, they just drag us down and suck us dry of our money. And that may sound harsh, but it's very true. Because you need to be careful who you do business with. Because if they don't believe in democracy, you got a problem. If they don't believe in freedom, you have a problem. If they don't believe in capitalism, they have a problem. If they don't believe in the strength of the private sector, you have a problem. If they don't believe in, good policies and safe practices like with the FDA, you've got a problem. Just basic issues. So that's why I don't want the United States to be on the hook and to be, I guess, aligning itself with other countries in regards to any of these unions, because then in a way it holds us accountable for these other people and we are not responsible for them. The United States is only responsible for the United States. That's not meant to be harsh. That's just a fact. That's just a common sense way of looking at things, and we need to keep it simple and keep it common sense, because otherwise it's going to be the taxpayer or the consumer that pays the price, literally, and pays the price with monies. So that means that whatever these labor unions do, they can very much try and control the economy. Now, do you really want them in charge of that? No. Because not everybody has a labor union job. I mean, it's one thing if you work in a labor union or you are a member in a labor union, you probably don't see anything wrong with what labor unions do. But that's a big problem, because you should see the problems that are going on in your labor union, and you should realize that, hey, a lot of what they do does not line up with what actually happens in the private sector. And it's not economical what these labor unions do. It's not fiscally smart or sound or safe what they do. So if it's not fiscally sound or safe, especially, then how can the employer invest in its employees? How can it invest in proper safety standards or measures if basically the company's funds are being depleted? That is what has happened to other companies whenever they have a labor union that just goes hog wild over different things and is not kind and respectful to the employer, to the person or persons that actually started and founded the company. Because here's the thing, I think a lot of people forget that even the owners of the companies are workers, and they have workers' rights too. Because within workers' rights is equality. It doesn't matter if you are an executive or if you're answering the phone at the front desk. Everybody that works for a company has workers' rights, and they are protected. Why? Because of equality, whether it is at the state level or the federal level. But unfortunately with these labor unions, they make it seem like it's always the rich against the poor. I'm like, you know what? I'm so sick of the poor crying wolf about stuff all the time. I'm like, okay, what exactly is the issue? Like, what is it that you're bringing to the table? See, because what people don't want to talk about is that poor people can be greedy too. And it's hidden greed. Because people don't like to think that the poor are greedy. Or that they covet other people's property, or they covet other people's goods, or they're jealous of somebody. They are jealous. There's so many of them that are. And this jealousy also occurs in the middle class, but no one likes to call it out. Well, on this show, we call a spade, and we say it like it is. Because, I believe in transparency. I believe in being honest about stuff. So, those are some of the reasons why I get concerned with labor unions. If they're truly focused on the safety of the employee, that's great. But if it starts to extend out towards, like crazy stuff like what Black Lives Matter did, and then some of these other these crazy groups that are more agenda-based, or propaganda-based, I get concerned with that, because they're getting off track from actually keeping it simple and focusing on the rules, laws, and regulations that are already in place, that are already there to protect you and have been protecting you for some time. Just because you're not aware of a rule, law, or regulation, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And that doesn't mean that you can't utilize it to protect you. It just means you were ignorant of it at the time of whatever happened to you. So just because you were ignorant, that doesn't mean that somebody's got to pay. You know what I mean? Like, that's one reason why I wanted to make this podcast about the endurance of labor laws is to wake people up to the fact that there are rules, laws, and regulations that are already on the books, that are already in place to protect you, to guard and protect you as a person, your safety and, your future, as well as to protect your labor. Because, sometimes we just play the blame and shame game. Well, you know what? I don't play that game. I don't believe in blaming. I don't believe in shaming. I think we should just say it like it is, let the chips fall where they land, and we need to move forward in a positive direction. Some of these labor unions do not move forward in a positive direction. A lot of times there is a ulterior motive, and it's usually people that are not in labor unions that suffer the most at the hands of people in labor unions. And we see that in terms of inflation, the destabilization of our currency, the price of goods, and the availability of goods. We're already experiencing that right now. So I pray that this does not become something super serious. I do agree that workers should have workers' rights, and they already have them, and they do have the right to unionize, and that's a wonderful thing. I just pray they don't take it so far that it ruins the company. Because Amazon employs a lot of people. We can do a special podcast going forward, or an episode about Amazon and some of these large companies that sometimes they're just constantly demonized. I'm like, do you realize how much good they actually do? Is any company perfect? No. But is Amazon evil? No, I don't think they're evil. I think they've got some problems just like other companies, and I think they should be given the opportunity to correct those problems. But if you don't give them a chance to correct the problems, then all you're doing is shaming and blaming, and you're destabilizing a company, which also destabilizes, in a way, our market and our country and our economy. So you want to be careful about what you destabilize, like if it's warranted or if it's not warranted. And if you're just going after someone just to go after somebody, I have to tell you, you're in the wrong. And what you're doing is illegal, immoral, and amoral. So, just be careful with those things. It's better to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, and it's better to give somebody a chance to apologize and to correct their own behavior, as opposed to being completely unrealistic and not being knowledgeable about the actual industry that you work in. But anyway, I will go ahead and end this podcast. But until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.